Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our conference and the Translating Europe workshop, which is today. I'm Emilia Andreeva, and I will be chairing the first session on human factor in machine translation and post-editing. If you have any questions to our three speakers, please use Slido, #TIC2021. Let me introduce you the first speaker, which is François Tunus, who works as computational linguist at the Director General for Translation of the European Commission. He used to work as an interpreter for 25 years, mostly for the Court of Justice, and then he switched on to IT. As he says, the word translator does not appear in his career history, which makes him more than qualified to talk about translation. François, over to you. What you have to say about machine translation at the European Commission. Floor is yours.
Dobrý den, thank you very much. I am going to try and start the presentation. I'm not sure. Doesn't seem to be working. Okay, I'll share my screen then. There you go. So, my speech will be divided into two parts. First, I'm going to talk a bit about what we are doing at the European Commission, where it comes from and why we do it and how we do it. And then I'll come to the subject of this workshop, which is the human factor. So, machine translation at the Commission. Machine translation at the Commission has been is a long history. It started with statistical machine translation, and I call this legalese because it was mostly used at the beginning for legal text. Soon it became, after, say, 10, 15 years, we switched to neural machine translation, pretty much like everybody else in the field, for the reason that have been explained very well by Professor Pedersen. The flow is simply much nicer. The quality of translation is much better. And the difference between our systems and the other systems are that it started as an internal system. It is now being extended to the outside, mostly in the framework of the Connecting Europe facilities, better known as the acronym CEF. And there we're rolling out loads of different tools, not only translation, but also speech recognition, names entity recognitions, summaries, etc., etc. The history is important because, as I said, it started as an internal tool to help the translators. The idea was that we have a lot of translation. And in that respect, it's interesting to see that it was something touched upon also by Professor Pedersen when he started talking about the corpora of subtitle which is used. Well, all corpora is very well known. We are sitting on more than 50 years of official translations. So all corpora is all the translation which have been done by human translators over the years, and we therefore have a perfect corpora of aligned text in all the official languages. The DGT translation, as you can see, was first for the translator and the staff. Then it was enlarged to the other institutions, so not only the Commission. And then in the framework of CEF, we are now working for loads of people. We are working not only with universities, but also with the public administration in the different member states, but also since last year with small and medium enterprises as well. It is not yet open to the public at large, like Google and other systems, mostly because we have a certain number of characteristics. First of all, our system is extremely secure. Nothing goes out of the union. We also offer encryption. We have a system which makes sure that texts are processed cannot be identified even by ourselves, which is sometimes a problem because sometimes we get reports from the users saying, "Well, I sent this translation and there was a problem. Can you have a look at it?" And we say, "No, we can't because the names of the files submitted are mangled on purpose, so we can't identify what's coming on, and it is deleted as soon as it is no longer necessary. So we have absolutely no way to trace what is going on in the systems. What can I do with e-translation? Well, from what I just said, you already have possibly an idea. First of all, we have the integrated workflow inside of the house where the translation departments with different languages will submit the text, and that goes automatically. There's a package which is created for the in-house translators that will contain not only the original text but also the first machine translation version of the text, and it can then be revised by human translators. It can also stop there if it is somebody sending a text and they just want to know roughly what's in there. So that's also a possibility. And then we have the API, which is being used more and more, and which is behind pretty much all the European websites. Unfortunately, most of us have heard recently about a website called Reopen Europe, for example. It is entirely powered by e-translation. So we have all the different languages, the official languages, and then some. I'll come back to that later. And you can either send your text, download it, or get it by mail, or you can have that included into your system. E-translation is now available not only in the official languages, but also in Russian, Mandarin, Japanese, Turkish, Arabic, and we are working on even more languages. We also have a characteristic which is probably what sets us apart from most of the other systems out there. As I said, the corpora that we use is a database which is called Euramis, which stores all the texts which have been translated for the Commission. However, this was working very well for anything that was in-house because the style was the same. But soon we realized that there are other texts, and for some reason people insist on not speaking exactly like the EU texts are written. So we did different engines, different translation engines. The one which are the default option and which are used in-house is still the one that we call EU formal language. That's the one that I called at the beginning legalese, although of course if it started with legal text, it is now being expanded in almost all possible corners of the language. But we also now have other engines. There is one which is called the general text, which is made partly with data coming from Euramis, but also with data coming from the internet. We also have specialized engine that we made at the request of some people, for example, the Court of Justice, but also the Deutsche Bundesbank or the Ministère des Finances, and of course the Valtionenövningskanslia, which, as everybody knows, is the office of the Swedish Prime Minister. As you know, Sweden has two official languages, Swedish and Finnish, and therefore they have to translate back and forth between those two languages quite a lot. And we provide them with specific engines to do that. So this is all nice and well, but what about the translation quality? Well, as you can expect, what works best is, of course, anything which is related to European policies, because after all, this is what it was made for. It is being built with all those official translations. So anything that has been in a text at some point will be picked up by the machine, and chances are that the translation will be perfect because it is based on a human translation. What works less well, well, you won't be surprised to hear that, is anything that is not standard or new creative text or anything that is taken out of context. This is one of the problems that we have at the moment with the websites, because they tend to submit very short snippets, and therefore it's sometimes difficult to know exactly what the best translation could be, because we're lacking completely the context. If you are using the machine yourself, then you can choose your domain, which is something that most of the people don't do because it's very carefully hidden under advanced options, where you can choose your engine. So there is the your formal language or the general text. And as you can see from the not very good, I'll grant you that, but from the example on the screen, it makes quite a difference, because if you take a sentence like "the chair was broken during the meeting," which would give something as "predsedával podczas poruszení," in EU formal language, because that's what happened, the chairman of the meeting was stopped for some reason. If you take the general text engine, then if the chair was broken during the meeting, chances are that whatever he was sitting on suddenly broke and he fell on the floor. So we have a completely different translation because we have a completely different engine trained with a completely different corpora. So this is one of the characteristic of our engines that is really important, because most of the people just take whatever engine is there. And that's why it's important to remember that it was made first and foremost for people in-house, and therefore the default is not what you want to have if you just want to have, I don't know, the words of a song, for example, or a newspaper article. Right, so this is what we have at the moment, but what is coming up? Well, there's plenty in stores for you. We're extending the coverage to different scientific texts, social media, etc. Last week, for example, I was training engines to work in the very specific COVID-related medical field. But we are also adding different new technology. I mentioned named entity recognition, speech to text, summarization, anonymization, some cat tools that we will be offering on the website. You can see that those are in fact in parentheses, And it is not because we're not quite sure. It is because, in fact, they are already there. I put them in the future simply because we are going to extend those quite a lot. The This is the page as it looks now. So as you can see, there's already quite a lot. You have e-translation, but you can also have multilingual tweet. You can have speech to text already, different tools, and so on and so forth. How can you use the system? How can you register? Well, as I said, it is already available for the public administrations, member of the universities, anybody working in a self-funded project, and SMEs after validation. You simply need to go to this website, and there's a self-registration. If you want to use the API, then it's a bit more complicated, and then you need to get in touch with us because we need to enable the access, and it's a different server. So I can only say that if you are amongst the people who may already use the system, then go for it, and you will see that our translations are indeed amongst the best out there. I think I can say that. I would like now to come to the subject of the workshop, now that you know what we do and how we do it. Oh, by the way, yes, sooner or later, hopefully, everybody will have access. But as I was saying at the beginning, I realized I'd never finished what I started to say there. We have a very secure system, and we have our servers are in the digit premises, which is the general directorate of the commission, which is in charge of IT, and therefore we actually have our own servers. So which means that opening up is not as easy as it seems, because we can't just say, okay, we'll buy 25,000 servers and open it to the whole of Europe. It's not as easy as that, which is one of the reasons we go very, very carefully about that, because we have, unfortunately, infrastructure problems. I would like now to come to the human factor. The human factor, well, I'll start with some numbers. I deliberately didn't put anything on the screen because it looks much more impressive with all those numbers, but I'll tell you what they mean roughly. 34,000 or 35,000, 36,000, give or take a couple thousand, doesn't really matter, is the number of EC staff all across the different institutions and the different countries. We have in those, depending on how you read the stats, between 600 and 2,000 people working in the translation services. Their output is about 2 million pages per year, which gives roughly 10 pages per day per person, roughly, very, very roughly. Compared to that, the 100 million that you see there is the number of pages which have been translated by our machine translation system, e-translation, as of June this year. In order to get that output based on the productivity that I explained before, the commission or the institutions would need to hire an extra 27,397 translators. I'll let that sink in for a moment. Okay, we would need to double the number of EC staff just to absorb the number of pages which is translated by e-translation, and that was in 6 months. Okay, so this is really something that need to be considered when thinking about machine translation. The need is such that it is not taking work away from any human translators. The request, the demand for translation far goes beyond the available resources in terms of translators. And to the human factor. Well, I'll tell you a little story. I do those presentations in different languages in different places. Unfortunately, my Slovak is not good enough to do it in Slovak, but I do it in Spanish, in Portuguese, and other languages. And of course, the first time that I did it in Portuguese, I thought, well, I'm not going to translate this PowerPoint presentation. I'll ask the machine to do it, since our system can take, pretty much any format, including PowerPoint. So I sent my Portuguese translation. Yes, I know, on the screen it says Spanish. Bear with me. So I sent my Portuguese translation to the system. It came back, and of course I had a very careful look at it. Translation wasn't too bad, but it was a bit incoherent, because in some places CEF, Connecting Europe Facilities, was translated, and in others it wasn't. So that was a bit weird. Okay, I filed that for further reference. I talk about it with the colleagues, saying, what's going on? This is weird, and we'll make a note to have a look at it. A couple of weeks later, I'm asked to give the same presentation in Spanish. So I said, oh, okay, I'll send that to the machine to see what it has to say. And it comes back perfect. Absolutely no error whatsoever, including the famous Connecting Europe Facilities acronym, which was translated consistently every single time in Spanish. So quite happy, and wondering a bit why, but I guess it's the quality of the data, because in terms of machine learning, data is pretty much everything. I am in touch with the person doing the organizing the conference, and she says, "Well, do you have by any chance an advance copy of what you are going to present, so that we can send it to the interpreters?" And having been an interpreter myself, I said, "Of course." There you go, and please tell me if there is anything that looks a bit weird in that translation. But I mean, I do speak Spanish, but obviously it's not my mother tongue. And she comes back to me and says, "No, it's absolutely perfect. There's just one thing." I said, "Yes." And she says, "Well, this CEF thing, you've translated it every time into Spanish, but we don't." So you see, there I was so happy that the machine had perfectly translated the text, and it turns out that, in fact, a human wouldn't have done it, because that's not how people speak. So I thought that was quite interesting, and of course I laughed a lot. And I told her, "Well, do you realize that this was done by a machine?" And she said, "Oh, no." Other example, which is in Greek, and which is extremely funny. I decided, of course, those examples are taken from Google, because our engine wouldn't make that kind of mistake. But anyway, so I picked up text in Greek, and I stuck it in Google's Translate, and I picked Norwegian. I usually pick Norwegian or Danish when I test Google, for two reasons. First of all, because I know the language, so I can check and see what's going to come out, but also because Norwegian and Danish, it's roughly between 5 and 6 million people. So again, coming back to what I was saying, the data is of course not what you get when you look at I don't know, German-speaking countries, for example, and therefore that's where the real test is. So I picked Norwegian, and I picked, of course, the result is absolutely hilarious because it doesn't mean anything. And contrary to what Professor Peterson was saying, you can see here that the machine can be extremely creative because the French has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with the original, and it's even completely surreal, since the last sentence is, for those of you who don't speak French, "Je suis un éléphant," I am an elephant, which is quite interesting. I fail to see in what circumstance that kind of sentence could be used, but anyway. Um, and of course, you're going to say, well, it's logical because you put that and said that it was Norwegian. But that's my whole point. You see, a human would never do that kind of mistake, because even if you don't speak Norwegian or Greek for that matter, you probably know that Greek is not written with Latin letters. So that kind of mistake could not happen. And this is, of course, a bit far-fetched, but at the same time, don't forget that we work with an API, which is a computer working with a computer. And if the text has been, for some reason, mislabeled, it's going to end up as a source text being Norwegian, even though any translator would see immediately that it is not Norwegian. Then one, and I put it in Greek this time. By the way, Google has an automatic detection of the language, and it should have detected that it was not Norwegian. But anyway, then again, I put it there, and it's quite interesting because it does correct my sentence, because as you can see, I use indifferently different spelling. So on the top it says for vume, and at the bottom it says for vame. You have different possibilities to write things. Same thing for Leftheros, which is corrected in Leftheros. But the translation, the two first sentences are almost okay. I don't hope anything. I'm not afraid of anything. Okay, fair enough. I'm a lighter. God knows what that means, but it's definitely extremely, extremely creative. This text is a no-brainer because anybody who speaks Greek know that sentence. It's a hugely famous sentence. Δεν ελπίζω τίποτα, δεν φοβούμαι τίποτα, είμαι ελεύθερος. Usually the translation in English is I hope nothing, I fear nothing, I'm free. And this is a famous quote on the thumb of Mr. Katsantzakis, who's a writer, a huge writer, a huge politician as well in his days, and he's probably best known outside of Greece because one of his books called The Life of Alexis Zorbas was made into a movie that was titled Zorba the Greek, and another one of his books called The Last Temptation was also made into a movie which is called The Last Temptation of Christ. And I swear I didn't talk to Professor Pedersen. We didn't make sure that we all would be talking about movies today. So there we go, an example which shows where things can go very, very wrong when you leave it to the machine. If we look at a different example, you will forgive me, but I'm Belgian. There's again something where okay, translation is okay, vos forces, vos vrijheid and vos recht, pour prince, pour la liberté et pour la justice, okay? If you turn it around and ask the other way around, le roi, la loi, la liberté, you get de koning, de wet, de vrijheid. As you can imagine, the real translation is what you have on the left-hand side of the screen, the original being le roi, la loi, la liberté, and voor vos, vos vrijheid, and voor recht, and those are the words of the Belgian national anthem. Again, any Belgian would recognize immediately those words and would not translate it. Here, the problem is not so much the translation in itself. It's okay. It's not fantastic, but it's okay. But of course, it does not work because it's completely lacking the context. And this is my whole point. This is the added value of the humans when they translate. And it is not only the possibility to summarize and synthesize, as Professor Peterson was saying, because as I was saying, we are working quite a lot on summarizations, and I think that we can actually get to something. We're not there yet, so he's right, definitely on that account. The current quality of translation or lack thereof is not there, but I am fairly confident, considering the advance in computing and in computing power, that sooner or later a machine will actually be able to make a decent job of summarizing enough so that it can be used for subtitles. But again, we're not there yet. But here, my point is that what is definitely lacking is the cultural part, and I don't see machines getting there anytime soon. A couple more examples, just because they are quite funny. There was a book written by a German journalist, Undercover, where he was in fact posing as a Greek immigrant in Germany, and he was given very, very bad jobs. And the name of that book is Ganz unten, and it was translated perfectly in French as Tête de Turc. Of course, there again, as in the case of the subtitles, we can see that the French has nothing to do with the German, but the idea that it conveys is absolutely fantastic, because it is the best title you could get for the book. Tête de Turc, for those of you who don't speak French, is a scapegoat, which is basically what he is in the book. Other example, Come Dine With Me. If you're familiar with English TV, you know that you cannot translate that as venez dîner avec moi, because the equivalent is un dîner presque parfait, which is the French version of the show. And finally, because we're getting to the end of my presentation, the one which for me is the best translation ever. I don't know if you have children, and maybe even if you're not, you may be familiar with a series of books called Harry Potter. And in that Harry Potter book, there is the sorting hat, which is the hat that will decide to which school every wizard apprentice will go, which house they will go to. The sorting hat, not a fantastic expression in English, but it does the job. The French one is fantastic. Le chapeau. It's absolutely brilliant, because you have chapeau, which is hat, you have choix, which is to decide, to sort, to choose, and the translator made a word, completely made up word called chapeau, which says exactly what it needs to say, and which is immediately understandable by anybody speaking French. So for me, this is really the best example of what translators are for, the best that they can do is precisely, since they're going to be beaten by numbers, we've seen that at the beginning, so fighting machine translation is a lost cause. But they have another field where I don't see machines beating them anytime soon, and it is anything that has to do with culture. And I think that Professor Peterson can rest assured that before we get a machine intelligent enough to be able precisely to use that knowledge of the culture to do subtitles, well, there's going to be quite a number of years yet. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Francois, for your presentation. I would like to see actually a Harry Potter book being translated by the machine. It might be quite fun. But anyway, we have 2 questions on Slido. And very quickly, because we are running over time here a bit, could you tell us more about the speech-to-text features?
The speech-to-text feature at the moment, I'll toggle this. The speech-to-text feature at the moment is starting, which is why it was still in parentheses in my presentation. We are at the moment only offering French, English, and German, the usual suspects. We are working on different engines, but it's extremely difficult because there's a huge difference between speech recognition and machine translation, and the difference is in the data. What I mean is that, for example, a speech recognition system would have to recognize what I am trying to speak at the moment as English, which of course it is not necessarily the kind of English that you will find on the internet. I think I made my point. You see, it's much, much more complicated. Especially in the European context, where by definition, I would say pretty much 90% of the people are not speaking their mother tongue. So it's something that is very difficult. However, we're not the only one to work on that. Everybody's working on it. That's the next kid on the block. The European Parliament, for example, is also working on a different system. And there are, of course, very good reasons for that. They are working also in subtitling, so not only speech to text, but immediate subtitling. The reason being, of course, that when they broadcast the sessions of the parliament, they want everybody to be able to watch those. So that includes hearing impaired people. So they need to have subtitles. There's another problem, not only in the case of the parliament, but mostly in the case of the parliament, which is that there are different speakers, and therefore, they can switch from one language to the other, and that throws completely the machine. Again, you see, an interpreter will either do it if he or she knows the language, or hand over to the colleague, and that will flow seamlessly. Machine, not quite so. So I lost track of the original question, sorry.
Okay,
I get carried away. You see, that's the problem with humans.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so are there any quality checks for the e-translation translated pages?
It depends who is requesting it. Of course, in the internal system, it goes to human translation for revision. Yes, but as I was saying, if it's somebody, if I send a file because I don't know, or service receives a letter from the outside and it's in a language that nobody can handle, they will send it. They will have a look. What they need is to know what's in there. So it's not a language contest. So it depends, and same thing for the small and medium enterprise. When they send us stuff, if they do not do any revision, we insist on having a disclaimer on anything that goes out, precisely because we are...
We lost sound. Francois? Francois? No. Francois, we lost you completely, so I don't know if you've managed to switch off your sound. Okay, there is nothing going on, I'm afraid. Can you try to say something? No. Yeah, it might be an issue with the internet. If you can't hear us. Okay, so there is an internet issue. I will thank you for your presentation, and we will need to move to our next speaker, who is Balash Kish. Good morning. Good morning, Balash.
Good morning. Dobry den.
So let me briefly introduce you. Balash Kish is the founder and the co-CEO of MemoQ and also member of the board of Gala. His background includes information technology, applied linguistics, and translation, but since 2018 he also deals with compliance at his company. He's also a member of the Society for Corporate Compliance of Ethics, which would be a very good background for our afternoon roundtable discussion, but now he will talk about the human factor in developing CAD software, so over to you.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank the organizers to arrange for me to speak remotely in the last minute, because I had to realize that with a cold it's not a good idea to travel to Bańska Bystrica. I was looking forward to meeting you in person. I'm wondering if you can see my slides, because I can't. I can only see myself on the screen. And
we should be able to bring your slides, yeah. This is the technology and the human factor, you know, inter-reacting in real time.
Yeah, and the viruses. And the viruses. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
So, thank you. And I would also like to apologize to the interpreters, because of everything that's happened, I was only able to send my presentation last afternoon. So I realized that leaves less time to prepare. So I hope it is clear enough, it contains information enough for you to be able to translate what I'm saying. Yeah, that was the first time I tried this remote slide clicker, and I'm happy to see it works. So Emilia already listed my affiliations. It's not a secret that I'm one of the founders of MemoQ, that is one of the CAT tools around. What also comes in handy is that I'm a member of the board of directors of GALA, Globalization and Localization Association, and on top of that, we have, as GALA, we have recently started cooperating with the language industry platform expert group, which provides the Directorate General for Translation with advice, and I happen to be the liaison between the GALA board and LIND. And because we are talking about the human factor, and especially recently, we've seen a lot of intersection between technology development and ethical questions. I think that my background with compliance and ethics. I wouldn't call it much of a background. Actually, I'm a novice in that field, but I feel I learned a lot. That would be also helpful in this presentation. So, I'm giving an agenda here, but my talking points sometimes overlap between these topics. But basically, I want to take up on where Monsieur Tunus left off. What is human-centered translation and what is its reason to exist? What does human-centered technology look like? So I will actually look at it from the perspective of technology as well. How does software development become human-centered? That is also a question that I would like to explore a bit. And with a detour about disruptive development and the innovator's dilemma. And obviously, I won't leave out the questions about artificial intelligence and its ethical implications, because there have been a lot of talk about that as well. I will try to give you a lot of resources and reading to familiarize yourself with these topics if you are not yet familiar with them. So we know that there are translations. This is, Monsieur Tunus pointed out some aspects of that. So there are translations where the hard work of humans with extraordinary knowledge is still required. The way I say here is not all translations give themselves to fully automatic machine translation. And we, at least at MemoQ, we call this kind of translation premium translation that cannot be produced without human involvement. This is not necessarily a factor of how difficult the text is or the content is to translate, but it can also be dependent on the context where the translation is used. For instance, if you do translation in life sciences about clinical trials, for example, then whatever there is in the translation has implications on the safety and the life of humans. And that cannot be released without human, that kind of translation can never be released without human supervision, no matter how easily the text would actually give itself to machine translation in itself. So that's basically the reason for human-centered translation to exist. That simply there are, and in my opinion, there will always be translations where, again, the way we say it, the hard work of humans with extraordinary knowledge is required. And there's another aspect to this if you approach this from the technology side, that humans are the only voluntary agents. There is no machine that would actually want or like something. While human decisions are very often based on these, and sometimes the decisions cannot be based on full information because full information is not available, and then the human mind has the means, has the shortcuts to find, with a certain level of precision or certainty or safety, the safest, the most viable solution. Or decision. One of my starting points, one of my kind of supporting materials that I go back to is Summa Technologiae by Stanislav Lem, where he says this, and he also says that humans, in order to conquer their environment, use technology as the extension of their bodies, the extension of their organisms. The English translation, there's a recent English translation of this book that was made in 2019, and it says that men using technology or tools as man's organs. but basically we are talking about an extension of the human body and the human mind. And not the other way around. And if you decide, and creating human-centered technology is also a decision, a conscious decision on the part of the human that designs or creates the technology. So do you aim at replacing humans? Which would be completely, well, not necessarily completely fine, but which would be understandable if we had machine translation that would work equivalently to a human at all times, and we could be or more reliably, and we could be absolutely certain of that. But we don't have that. And as long as we don't have that, and like I said in the previous examples, we need the human who makes the decision and takes responsibility. Because also a computer, a machine, an artificial intelligence doesn't have personhood, doesn't have the kind of capacity to decide that would be paired up with legal responsibility, for instance. And at that moment, I believe that the developer of technology needs to decide to create technology that empowers humans and doesn't replace them, doesn't aim at replacing them. This is where we used to say, well, it didn't even make it to the marketing material, so I would just say it as one of my pet peeves, that this is the kind of technology that gives a human translator, an editor, a project manager superpowers, or they augment their capabilities. Actually, there was some literature where I guess it was Common Sense Advisory that called this kind of translation augmented translation. And there's another aspect here, again, that the designers and the developers of technology are also human. I used to teach computer-assisted translation CAT tools at various universities for more than 10 years. I quit teaching a couple of years ago because of the workload, but I clearly remember when the humanities students, the translation students, who were supposed to pick up technical skills with the CAT tools, approached the technology with apprehension. That in 2004, I even heard a lecture that called it technophobia. And what I experienced was an assumption from the students' part that they are looking at something, an alien entity with its own mind and its own will. And one of the ways to combat this kind of technophobia was to tell the students the same thing I'm telling you here, that a piece of software was written by humans. It's another channel of communication between the humans who created the technology and the humans who are using the technology. And the software in this context is the tool and one of the communication channels at the same time. Although, like I said, it's okay to dream of a world where you don't need translation, you don't need to learn the language, you don't need to do the hard work of translating, of editing, of putting the whole thing together, double checking once, twice, three times. I come from publishing originally, where we have at least 3 quality assurance passes. So this is completely okay, and it's there in human culture. And this is where I'm recommending this book by Umberto Eco, I don't remember the original Italian title because I read it in Hungarian, but in English it's called The Search for the Perfect Language, and it gives an account of the attempts that were made to find the language in which God used to create the world, and the language that got lost in the Tower of Babel, and the list goes on. So the dreams are okay. But to say that we achieved our dreams is not okay, because it's not true. We don't even have the means to measure them. That the assumption that machine translation will never be able to reach human parity actually comes from a linguist called Yehoshua Bar Hillel, and he made that statement in 1953. Well, a lot changed since then, but we still have suspicions that might be the case, that there will always be a margin, however narrow it is, that the machine will not be able to follow the humans too. And machine translation is of course useful, and the way it was developed and presented in the European Union is at its most useful. But there is also the human factor, a factor of the human revision, where we know that it is only the human who has the mind and the will to decide how good the translation is. It's the human that has the kind of personhood that can take the responsibility for the translation. And this is why the technology still needs to be under human control. This is what we say, and this is the kind of technology we develop. And there obviously, when you say you are creating human-centered technology, you need to create in a way that it remains human-centered, and this is why I'm listing a couple of methods to come to new technology. For instance, when we first conceived the tool that we developed, was by looking at the existing landscape, at technology landscape at the time, and looked for some obvious aspects why we can improve them. For instance, if there is a tool that requires you to go through 12 save as windows to create a new project, obviously you can improve on that and create a process to create a new project that requires no save as windows at all. And I'm talking about simple things like that. And you can also use human intuition. You can dream up new functionality. That is the least productive in this context. And there are two things that we actually do, we actually also do, is that we have user interviews constantly. We have opened an ideas portal where we are receiving ideas, requests for new functionality constantly. And this is, obviously you don't directly implement everything that comes to you. That kind of development capacity doesn't exist. But you have a good view of how your users, how your customers, clients view the technology you create. You get immediate feedback. And you can also go analytical and crunch usage data that will give you, if you have the usage data, that will give you an idea where users spend disproportionately long time to accomplish a task, because that would mean that actually your tool has a bottleneck where it makes it difficult for humans to get a task accomplished. So we are heavily building on the last two. And the reason our tool is not complete and perfect is actually in every year a development team, and this is not just us, can implement like 5% of the new functionality that was derived this way. And part of that is also a factor of the human face that you put on it. don't hide behind your technology. If you're a technology provider who wants to create human-centered technology, then you need to put that human face on it, and that means being approachable, even through email, but it should be a person and not necessarily a machine. When at least when you get your response, it needs to come from a human, and that means that customer support needs to be done by kind of visible people, and also all kinds of other feedback needs to be received by actual people, and the customer needs to know that these are actual people, because that's one of the factors that helps lower the apprehension from the human user to the technology. I think we are running short on time. I will skip this disruption part because it doesn't really play a part. What is disruption anyway? So I showed you a schematic of the Babel fish earlier on. That would be disruption. Or for instance, you can say that in transportation, an electric car is not necessarily a disruption to the way we move around. It may be a disruption to the fossil fuel industry. The real disruption to transportation would be teleportation. So, and the other thing with the disruption is that it's not predictable. You cannot plan to disrupt. You will have 1,000 ideas, and one of them work out, and one of them will maybe prove to be disruptive to an area or another. But even you don't know in advance, because it also depends on how the human users will adopt the new thing that you created. All right, let's go back to artificial intelligence, and this is if I'm cut off, because my time's over. We can continue the discussion in the roundtable later this afternoon. But there are ethical implications to how artificial intelligence is developed and used, and I don't claim to be an authority on that, but I recently read a book that was published this year. The author is Kate Crawford, who used to work or still works, I don't remember that, for Microsoft Research, and the book is called The Atlas of AI, and it paints the whole picture that exists behind creating an artificial intelligence application such as a machine translation engine. Is it really what they say it is? Like we said that, well, AI, when you say AI, artificial intelligence, you think of an entity that has the same kind of mind and will or superior than yours. And at the same time, we know three things that the previous presentation, it was called the lack of culture or lack of context, or lack of cultural context, because it works from data only and it sees nothing but the data that was fed into it. And in a way or another, it will mimic previous human behavior. It will apply a lot of tricks, because neural networks that are exclusively used today as the engines of artificial intelligence apply very sophisticated mathematics to come to conclusions, come to predictions from the data that were entered in the system. However, it will still be based on data and still be based on previous human behavior without seeing the actual context that the human behavior reacted to. The other thing is the lack of volition and the lack of will and mind, if you will. The kind of will, the kind of personhood that could go with responsibility. So what I could say, you didn't use the term artificial intelligence, especially not if you create like a predictive typing algorithm that could be created from statistical algorithms. It could be created from a neural network, but it's predictive typing, not AI. Like machine translation is machine translation, not AI. I would say AI is only a collection of highly sophisticated mathematical methods of selection and prediction, which are formidable on their own right. There's no need to call them more than they really are. And when it mimics human decisions, it also mimics bad human decisions. I was really hoping to be able to bring a Slovak example to this presentation, but I needed a language that doesn't have grammatical gender. And one of these languages is my own, Hungarian. You can see that that's a meme about Google Translate and the Hungarian language, and one of the proofs how artificial machine translation models perpetuate biases. You see on the left-hand side, you see a number of activities in a verbal form, in very simple sentences, with the only singular third-person personal pronoun Hungarian has. That's the one. That's the only one we have. And on the other hand, on the other side, you see the English translation. And look at the way the Google actually chooses the gendered pronouns for each and every activity. And that's not a coincidence. And if you look at the second example, that's something I tried yesterday, and it says he is Google, but she is sexist. And Google Translate has no other way to decide than the human data that were fed into it. And who is the ultimate beneficiary? Does the provider of the artificial intelligence or the application tell you everything on what data they collect, how they collect the data, how they use the data, how they get consent to use the data, stuff like that? And we can go down a long rabbit hole here. So I just want to throw this in as a food for thought.
Mr. Kish,
yeah.
I hate to interrupt you because we need to move on. So if we can actually leave this for the roundtable discussion in the afternoon.
We can do that. We can do that. Yeah.
And we are already looking forward to your insights because I can see that you have many of them. So I thank you for your time that you found now, and we will see you a bit later. Thank you very much.
I'm not going anywhere. Well, I'm coming back for the roundtable, and I'm looking at the questions there.